Right now, somewhere in a museum, there are human bones with cut marks on them. Not animal bones, human bones. And those cut marks were not made by predators, not made by time, not made by accident. They were made deliberately, carefully, by other humans, using stone tools, in the exact same way you would butcher a deer or a mammoth. And the people who made those marks were not monsters. They were not criminals. They were not outliers. They were just people. People exactly like us, living in a world so different from ours that what they did made complete, logical sense inside that world. By the end of this video, you will understand not just that ancient humans ate each other, but why, how often, under what circumstances, and the part that nobody talks about, that it did not fully stop as long ago as you think. Let us go back roughly 100,000 years. Early humans are living in small groups across Europe, Africa, and Asia. Food is not guaranteed. A bad hunting season means starvation. A harsh winter means people die. And when people die in a world with no refrigeration, no burial traditions yet fully formed, no concept of the sacred human body the way we understand it today, a dead body is just protein. That sounds brutal. It is supposed to sound brutal. But understand the context. A group of 15 people is starving. Someone dies. That body contains enough calories to keep the rest of the group alive for days. In that moment, the decision is not about morality. It is about mathematics. And ancient humans were very, very good at survival mathematics. The earliest confirmed evidence of cannibalism in human ancestors comes from a site in Spain called Atapuerca, where bones dating back 800,000 years show clear evidence of human flesh being systematically removed, marrow being extracted from the bones, and the skulls being cracked open to access the brain. These were not Homo sapiens. These were Homo antecessor, an earlier human species. But the behavior was there. Methodical, deliberate, and skilled. They were not just gnawing on bones in desperation. They were processing human bodies the same way they processed any other large animal. The cut marks are in the same places, made with the same techniques, with the same level of care. This was not panic eating. This was a practiced, understood process. Now move forward in time to Neanderthals, roughly 50,000 to 100,000 years ago. Neanderthals have had a complicated history in how we understand them. For a long time, we thought of them as brutish, primitive, barely intelligent. We now know that is completely wrong. Neanderthals made jewelry, buried their dead with what appears to be ceremony, cared for their sick and injured, and had complex social structures. They also, without question, ate each other. In a cave in Belgium called Goyet Cave, scientists found the bones of at least 5 Neanderthal individuals that had been defleshed, had their tendons removed, had their bones broken for marrow, and had even been used as tools afterward, the bones shaped and sharpened into points and scrapers. At a site in France called Moula Guercy, Neanderthal bones were found mixed in with deer bones in the same deposit, processed in exactly the same way. They were not eating each other as a separate, unusual event. The human remains were just part of the meal, mixed in with the regular food. And here's what makes Neanderthals particularly interesting. In some sites, the cannibalized remains are of other Neanderthal groups, suggesting raiding and consuming enemies. In other sites, the evidence suggests they were eating members of their own group, which points not necessarily to violence, but possibly to what anthropologists call funerary cannibalism, eating the dead as a form of honoring them or incorporating them into the living community. And that distinction matters enormously because cannibalism in the ancient world was not one single thing. It was not one behavior with one explanation. It broke into at least 3 very distinct categories, each driven by completely different motivations, and understanding those categories changes everything about how we see this practice. The first category is survival cannibalism. People who are starving eat whoever has died because the alternative is their own death. This is the one most people are familiar with, the one that feels most justifiable in modern moral terms, the desperate act of people with no other options. The second category is ritual or funerary cannibalism. Eating the dead as part of a ceremony, either to honor them, to absorb their strength or qualities, to prevent their spirit from wandering, or as a form of communion with ancestors. This was practiced by cultures around the world, across thousands of years, not in desperation, but as a structured, meaningful, intentional religious act. The third category, and the one that sits most uncomfortably, is what anthropologists call aggressive or gastronomic cannibalism. Eating enemies, captives, or strangers not from hunger and not from ceremony, but because it was done, because it was part of how power was displayed, how enemies were defeated, how dominance was communicated. Now let us talk about early Homo sapiens. Anatomically modern humans, us, are direct ancestors. The evidence for cannibalism among early Homo sapiens is extensive. At a site in England called Gough's Cave, dating back 14,700 years, human remains were found that showed extremely sophisticated processing. Not just defleshing and marrow extraction, but the skulls had been carefully shaped into what appeared to be cups or bowls. The faces were removed. The skulls were smoothed. This was not desperate eating. This was craft. Someone made a cup out of a human skull 14,000 years ago in what is now Somerset, England. Isotope analysis of the bones suggests these people were not malnourished, were not starving. They had food. They chose to process these humans anyway. The most likely explanation is ritual, that these skull cups were used in ceremonies, that drinking from them carried spiritual or social meaning that we can only guess at today. Move forward again, to roughly 12,000 years ago, as humans begin transitioning from hunter-gatherer lifestyles to early agriculture. You might think that more stable food supplies would reduce cannibalism, and in some contexts it did, but in others, the opposite happened. Settled communities meant conflict over land and resources. Conflict meant prisoners and enemies. And in cultures across the ancient world, consuming enemies became a statement of complete victory. You did not just defeat them, you incorporated them into yourself. You erased them so completely that they became part of you. In ancient Fiji, the term for a person who was not a cannibal was used as an insult. In parts of ancient Mexico, elaborate ritual cannibalism was tied directly to religious cosmology. The gods required human flesh and blood, and consuming sacrificial victims was a sacred act, not a transgression. The Aztec practice of human sacrifice, which included consuming parts of sacrificed individuals, was not seen as horrific by those who practiced it. It was seen as the maintenance of the universe itself, the fulfillment of a cosmic obligation without which the sun would not rise. And now comes the part that makes people genuinely uncomfortable, because we tend to assume all of this is ancient history, safely locked away in a distant past that has nothing to do with modern humans. But let us look at what actually happened. The Fora people of Papua New Guinea practiced ritual funerary cannibalism into the 1960s, not the distant past. 1960s, the same decade as the moon landing. They ate deceased family members as an act of love and respect, to keep the dead within the community rather than letting the body decay in the ground. The practice led to the spread of a prion disease called kuru, which caused neurological deterioration and death. And the study of kuru by scientists in the 1950s and 60s actually gave us the foundational understanding of prion diseases that eventually helped us understand conditions like Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease and bovine spongiform encephalopathy. So yes, the study of a cannibalistic funeral practice in the 1960s directly contributed to modern neuroscience. The distance between us and this is not as large as we want it to be. There's also something called medicinal cannibalism, which almost nobody talks about, and which was practiced in Europe, not ancient Europe, not prehistoric Europe, early modern Europe, the 1500s, 1600s, and into the 1700s. European physicians and apothecaries used human body parts as medicine. Human skulls were ground into powder and used to treat epilepsy and headaches. Human fat was used as a topical treatment for joint pain. Human blood, sometimes drunk fresh, was believed to treat epilepsy. Mummies, actual Egyptian mummies, were ground up and sold as medicine across Europe for centuries, until the supply of real mummies ran out and people began manufacturing fake ones using fresh corpses. King Charles II of England consumed a preparation called the King's Drops, which included distilled human skull. This was not fringe quackery. This was mainstream European medicine, practiced by educated physicians, purchased by wealthy aristocrats, recommended by established medical texts. The timeline here matters. Galileo died in 1642. Newton published the Principia in 1687. The age of scientific reason was underway, and European doctors were still prescribing powdered human skull as medicine. So why does all of this matter? Why is it important to understand that ancient humans ate each other, that ritual cannibalism continued into living memory, that European aristocrats were consuming human remains within the last 300 years? Because it forces us to confront something about human nature that is profoundly uncomfortable, but also profoundly important. Morality is not fixed. What is unthinkable in one cultural context is not only thinkable, but sacred, logical, or medicinal in another. The humans who made skull cups at Gough's Cave 14,000 years ago were cognitively identical to us. Same brain size, same neural architecture, same capacity for language and reasoning and love and grief. They were not primitive in any meaningful biological sense. They simply lived inside a different set of assumptions about what the world was, what death meant, what the body was for, and what obligations the living had toward the dead and toward the divine. And here is what the bones keep telling us. Every time a new site is excavated, every time a new set of cut marks is analyzed, every time isotope data reveals that a well-fed person was deliberately processed after death. Cannibalism was not a rare aberration on the edges of human history. It was a thread running through it, across species, across continents, across time periods, showing up in contexts of desperation and contexts of abundance, in contexts of violence and contexts of ceremony, in the deep prehistoric past and in the living memory of people who are still alive today. It is part of the human story in a way that is deeply, genuinely uncomfortable to sit with, which is exactly why it is worth understanding, because the things that make us most uncomfortable about our past are usually the things that teach us the most about what we actually are. If this changed the way you think about ancient humans even slightly, subscribe. Because next time, we are going to look at what ancient humans did to their enemies that was somehow considered even worse than this.